My fiancé just asked me to compete. After finding out his friends voted for him to leave me, James had one solution: meet them all for dinner, including his ex, so I could prove I'm not the insecure which they think I am. He wants me to audition for his approval. I should be planning my honeymoon, but instead I'm fighting to prove my worthiness to a man who won't even defend me. What do I do when my wedding feels like a trap? So, James returned to our dwelling last Saturday evening from his celebratory prenuptial gathering, utterly inebriated, and immediately began an agitated discourse, articulating how his male companions held the conviction that I am irrational and overly domineering. My immediate retort was, "To what precisely are you alluding?" And this audacious individual proceeded to chuckle and then divulged that his friends had conducted an actual ballot to determine whether he ought to sever our engagement prior to the impending matrimonial ceremony. A formal vote, if you will. As though I were some sort of public referendum to be debated within the confines of their unremarkable group chat. Apparently, the genesis of this entire predicament was when his associate, Tommy, inquired as to the conspicuous absence of Victoria from our wedding guest list. You are, of course, familiar with Victoria, his former romantic partner from his collegiate years, with whom he maintained a relationship for a substantial 3-year period, and who still frequently appends affectionate heart-eye emojis to every single one of his Instagram posts. Yes, that very Victoria, the self-same individual who unfailingly makes an appearance at every collective social function, despite their romantic separation occurring a full 2 years ago, and who persists in comporting herself as though she remains an integral constituent of their intimate social circle. Initially, James commenced a defense of my position, asserting that it is entirely conventional and indeed expected for fiancés not to extend invitations to their partner's former flames to their nuptial celebrations. However, Tommy then launched into an impassioned declaration about how Victoria is virtually an honorary member of their collective and how my stance was patently unreasonable. And instead of decisively quelling this inappropriate line of argumentation, James apparently merely remained seated, passively observing, while they all commenced a detailed dissection of my perceived personality deficiencies, as though I were some kind of intricate psychological undertaking requiring their collective intervention. By the time they had progressed through 3 distinct microbreweries, they were engaged in a full-fledged debate concerning whether James should definitively call off the matrimonial event due to my alleged excessive jealousy and pervasive insecurity. Tommy even retrieved a digital article on his mobile device pertaining to significant red flags in romantic partnerships and proceeded to vocalize its contents aloud, meticulously pointing out how I supposedly conformed to at least half of the stipulated criteria. The other gentlemen present readily interjected with their supposed sagacious relationship counsel, pontificating on how their respective girlfriends would never behave in such a fashion, and how I desperately needed to cultivate a more relaxed demeanor. And my fiancé, the very man I am slated to pledge my lifelong commitment to in a mere 6 weeks, simply permitted them to speak about me in such an unchivalrous manner. He did not valiantly come to my defense, he did not instruct them to desist from their intrusive commentary, nor did he even make a move to depart the gathering. He remained seated, imbibing fermented beverages and offering silent affirmations through head nods while his companions meticulously dismantled our intimate relationship, treating it as though it were some form of impromptu group therapeutic session. The ballot, it appears, was quite closely contested. 4 of the gentlemen advocated for him to summarily terminate our engagement. 3 proposed that he should retain me as his partner, but contingent upon my prior issuance of an apology to Victoria. And a paltry 2 individuals expressed the sentiment that I possessed an inherent right not to extend an invitation to her. Only 2 out of a total of 9 men considered my desire to exclude my fiancé's former girlfriend from our wedding to be a rational and justifiable stance. When James recounted these events to me, he was emitting peals of laughter as though it were an exceedingly amusing anecdote, as if the undeniable fact that his dearest companions genuinely believed he should abandon me was merely an instance of boys being boys. He persistently maintained that I should interpret this as a commendation, signifying that their concern for him was profound enough to elicit such candid counsel, and that perhaps I ought to seriously contemplate their perspective, given their claim to intimately understand him better than anyone else. I interrogated him directly, without equivocation, asking what precisely he communicated to them whilst they were engaged in their voting process. And he promptly adopted a highly defensive posture, asserting that he had endeavored to elucidate my viewpoint, but that I needed to grasp the external perception of the situation. How it looks. As though I harbor some inherent obligation to unfurl the metaphorical red carpet for his former romantic partner at my very own wedding. The most distressing aspect is that this is not even the inaugural instance where Victoria has fomented discord within the fabric of our relationship. She incessantly dispatches text messages to him concerning an array of disparate subjects. Oh, she saw this amusing digital image that brought him to mind. Oh, does he recall that particular occasion when they dined at that specific eatery? Oh, she's experiencing automotive malfunctions. Does he happen to know a competent mechanic? And each and every time I broach this recurring issue, James adopts a demeanor suggesting that I am being unduly paranoid and excessively jealous. He declares that her intentions are purely amicable and that I simply need to repose my trust in him. But here lies the crux of the matter. I unequivocally do trust him. My distrust resides with her. And I most certainly harbor profound skepticism regarding the persistent fact that she perpetually fabricates pretexts to maintain an enduring connection with him. When our engagement was officially announced, she was among the very first individuals to append a comment to our celebratory social media post, effusively expressing her boundless joy for us and eagerly anticipating the opportunity to participate in our festivities. The sheer audacity displayed was truly astounding. So now, I am ostensibly expected to passively accept the reality that his entire social contingent believes I am some variety of manipulative sorceress who is undeserving of him, and that my own fiancé passively endured and permitted them to conduct a ballot on the viability of our relationship, treating it as some form of democratic process. I dedicated the entirety of Sunday to diligently attempting to assimilate and process this distressing information. And candidly, I find myself oscillating persistently between sensations of deep emotional hurt and absolute, unadulterated fury. A segment of my being yearns to unilaterally rescind the wedding arrangements myself, solely to witness the expression of shock and dismay upon their countenances when their cherished Victoria ultimately does not receive her invitation regardless. However, the more substantial portion of my introspection leads me to ponder what other disparaging remarks James permits his companions to articulate about me during my absence. We are scheduled to convene with our designated wedding coordinator tomorrow to finalize the intricate seating arrangement for the reception. And I am utterly bereft of any comprehension as to how I am supposed to maintain a composed demeanor and feign that all is perfectly normal, when I am acutely aware that his closest associates genuinely believe he should forsake me. The wedding event is now a mere 6 weeks away, and we have already defrayed the costs for every single aspect. The chosen venue, the comprehensive catering services, my bespoke gown, indeed, every single expenditure has been settled. I have not yet disclosed this troubling situation to anyone, for honestly I am consumed by an overwhelming sense of mortification. How does one adequately explicate to one's family and intimate friends that your fiancé's bachelor party unexpectedly transformed into a direct plebiscite on your worthiness as a marital partner? My sister, Carly, is already harboring suspicions, as she has consistently believed that James maintains an overly intimate proximity to his friendship group in any event, and if I were to inform her of these recent developments, she would undoubtedly become incandescent with rage. The undeniable truth is, I am fully cognizant that my stance regarding Victoria is not at all unreasonable. Every single one of my acquaintances who are married has unequivocally assured me that the non-invitation of former romantic partners is an entirely customary and anticipated protocol. My cousin meticulously refrained from inviting her husband's former girlfriend. My professional colleague similarly did not extend an invitation to her husband's ex. Even my own mother, for that matter, did not invite any of my father's previous romantic interests to their matrimonial ceremony. This is not a manifestation of jealousy. It is simply a fundamental application of basic common sense and a profound respect for established interpersonal boundaries. Yet, James perpetually instills within me the sensation that I am the irrational party. As though I am expected to embody this perpetually cool individual who is entirely unperturbed by the presence of his former girlfriend at our wedding, her uninhibited texting at her leisure, and her persistent insertion of herself into virtually every facet of our romantic entanglement. And now his associates are providing him with staunch support, causing me to feel as though there is some inherent flaw within me for possessing entirely normal and justifiable boundaries. I find myself incessantly contemplating what other disparaging remarks they must have articulated about me that James, for whatever reason, chose not to repeat. If he was willing to disclose the existence of the vote, what other pronouncements did they make that he is assiduously keeping to himself? Did they engage in discussions regarding my physical appearance? How I conduct myself in their presence? Did they invoke other past actions of mine that they deemed to be significant red flags? The entirety of this situation has compelled me to scrutinize every single aspect of our relationship. If James genuinely believed that I was being unreasonable, why did he not simply engage in a private discussion with me about it, instead of permitting his companions to debate it at his bachelor party? And if he genuinely believes that his friends' perspectives are correct, why is he still making elaborate plans to marry me? I am in desperate need of counsel, as I am utterly perplexed as to how to navigate this predicament. Do I directly confront his friends regarding their inappropriate behavior? Do I demand that James vociferously defend me to them? Do I simply endeavor to feign ignorance of these events and fervently hope that the matter does not resurface? Or do I seriously commence a deep consideration of whether I truly desire to marry an individual who permits his companions to vote on whether I am sufficiently suitable for him? The wedding date is rapidly approaching, and every logistical detail has been meticulously arranged. However, I am beginning to harbor profound doubts as to whether I am in the process of committing an egregious error. How am I expected to gracefully proceed down that aisle, knowing full well that half of his groomsmen are of the firm conviction that he ought to summarily discard me instead? First update. First and foremost, I extend my profound gratitude to every individual who unequivocally affirmed that my sentiments regarding the Victoria situation were not, in fact, irrational. Perusing all of your insightful responses unequivocally brought to my awareness the profound dysfunction inherent in this entire predicament. The particular comment that likened his friend's actions to a veritable tribunal concerning my inherent worthiness resonated deeply and profoundly with me. That precisely encapsulated the essence of this entire affair. Consequently, we attended our scheduled consultation with the wedding coordinator at a diminutive office situated within the retail complex adjacent to our residential abode. James was behaving as though everything was entirely normal and proceeding without incident, engaging in discussions about intricate table centerpieces and deliberating whether our guests would prefer the piscatorial or poultry entree option. I found myself seated there, earnestly attempting to concentrate, yet my thoughts were inextricably dominated by the overwhelming realization that his groomsmen harbored the conviction that he ought to summarily abandon me. Ultimately, I reached my absolute limit and communicated to our planner, Rachel, that we required a few moments of private conversation. The instant she exited the room, I commenced an impassioned outpouring, articulating how I was utterly incapable of disengaging from the revelations he had previously imparted to me. James immediately embarked upon a defense, declaring that I was disproportionately magnifying the significance of everything, that male acquaintances are prone to engaging in idle chatter when under the influence of alcohol, and that I should not accord such gravity to their remarks. But this is precisely where the situation assumed a truly distorted and disconcerting dimension. When I pressed him for more granular specifics regarding the exact nature of their commentary about me, he inadvertently allowed it to slip that Tommy had been consistently voicing these disparaging opinions for several months prior. Apparently, on every occasion that we congregated with the collective group, Tommy would surreptitiously make critical observations to the other male members about how I was either excessively rigid or how James exhibited a more jovial disposition before our relationship commenced. And James, during this entire protracted period, had simply remained passively situated, absorbing these derogatory remarks for months, without ever once apprising me of their existence or decisively intervening to terminate them. I vehemently questioned him as to why, for heaven's sake, he had failed to inform me that his supposed closest friend had been systematically maligning my character behind my back. And James, in turn, became incensed with me for purportedly compelling him to make an agonizing choice between his long-standing friendships and his committed fiancé. He then embarked upon an extensive monologue, emphasizing Tommy's enduring status as his confidant since their collegiate days and asserting that he simply could not summarily sever their connection merely because Tommy did not harbor unqualified affection for every single facet of my personality. The discourse rapidly escalated in intensity, becoming exceedingly heated, and James finally conceded that perhaps a portion of Tommy's assertions were not entirely without merit. He articulated that he had, in fact, observed that I do exhibit episodes of jealousy when Victoria's name surfaces in conversation, and that perhaps I could endeavor to adopt a more empathetic stance regarding their long-standing platonic bond. He actually possessed the sheer audacity to propose that I should personally initiate contact with Victoria and strive to cultivate a cordial relationship with her, so that his friends would consequently perceive that I am not the domineering individual they apparently believe me to be. I was literally unable to process the incredible words that were emanating from his mouth. My very own fiancé was seated before me, articulating the possibility that his friend's assessment of me as being prone to jealousy and excessive control might, in fact, possess some validity. After a period of 3 years spent together, after formally proposing marriage to me, after meticulously planning this entire wedding celebration, he was suddenly entertaining doubts as to the legitimacy of their expressed apprehensions. I unequivocally communicated to him that if he genuinely believed his friend's opinions about me were accurate, then perhaps we ought not to proceed with the marriage whatsoever. And instead of instantaneously and emphatically declaring, "No, of course not, I love you," he lapsed into a protracted period of profound silence. A silence so profound, it suggested he was genuinely giving serious consideration to my statement. Subsequently, he declared his love for me, but immediately appended the caveat that he was deeply concerned about his friend's sentiments regarding our relationship, because these were the very individuals who were destined to remain a permanent fixture in our lives. Our wedding coordinator then gently tapped upon the door, inquiring if everything was satisfactory, given that we had been secluded within for approximately 30 minutes. And James simply offered a forced smile and asserted that we were perfectly fine, then requested that we reschedule the remainder of our consultation. Throughout the entire journey homeward, we maintained a complete and utter silence, neither of us uttering a single word. And I could distinctly perceive that his mind was engrossed in a meticulous re-evaluation of everything his friends had articulated. That evening, upon our return to our shared residence, James made an attempt to mollify the situation by stating that he had not intended to cause me emotional distress. However, he then, with remarkable insensitivity, reintroduced the recurring subject of Victoria. He posited that perhaps if I simply extended an opportunity to her and endeavored to establish a friendly rapport, it would effectively demonstrate to his companions that I harbored no feelings of intimidation by her presence, and that I implicitly trusted him. He persistently reiterated that she is, in fact, a genuinely pleasant individual once one truly becomes acquainted with her, and that her intentions were not to instigate discord between us. But then, and this is the specific aspect that truly profoundly affected me, he reluctantly admitted that Victoria had, in fact, been actively inquiring about our impending wedding arrangements. Not merely casual inquiries, but rather highly specific and detailed questions, such as the intended location of the event, the precise date, and whether there was any lingering possibility that she might, after all, receive an invitation. James informed her that I was solely responsible for managing the guest list and that her attendance would, in all likelihood, not materialize, but he conveyed this information in an unmistakably apologetic tone, as though he genuinely regretted her inability to be present. I then questioned him as to why Victoria would even entertain the notion of being invited in the first place. And he immediately became visibly uncomfortable and vaguely articulated that perhaps he had not been sufficiently explicit with her regarding the establishment of appropriate boundaries. Apparently, he has been consistently engaging in discussions with her concerning our wedding planning intricacies and our various relationship challenges, including the undeniable fact that I harbored a distinct preference for her non-attendance. Consequently, she is fully cognizant that I am the specific impediment to her invitation, and she has been actively attempting to circumvent my wishes by directly engaging with James on the matter. This entire protracted period, I had erroneously assumed that Victoria was simply behaving inappropriately by maintaining persistent contact with my fiancé. However, it transpires that James has been systematically disclosing intimate and personal details pertaining to our relationship and our wedding preparations to her. He has been deliberately portraying me as the antagonist, the bad guy who is arbitrarily preventing her from attending the wedding, instead of simply communicating to her that it is simply not appropriate for a former romantic partner to be present at such an event. When I directly confronted him regarding this profound breach of trust, James asserted that he was merely attempting to maintain a transparent and honest demeanor with her because she has been an intrinsic part of his social circle for such an extended duration. He claimed that it would be awkward and unnatural to suddenly commence being secretive about various aspects of his life when she poses inquiries. But I unequivocally highlighted the clear distinction between maintaining a degree of discretion and indiscriminately sharing intimate specificities concerning our relationship and our wedding plans with his former romantic partner. The contentious argument persisted into the subsequent day when James proposed that we should all convene at the sports bar located in the vicinity of his office. Specifically him, myself, Victoria, and perhaps a few of the other mutual acquaintances, so that I could personally observe that Victoria harbored no intentions of instigating discord. He genuinely believed that if I merely spent some dedicated time in her company, I would ultimately recognize her harmless nature and his friends would consequently perceive that I was not, in fact, afflicted by jealousy or an overly controlling disposition. I unequivocally informed him, absolutely not. I declared that I had no intention whatsoever of placing myself in such an utterly bizarre scenario where I would be compelled to demonstrate to his former girlfriend and his friends that I was sufficiently cool to be deemed worthy of him. The mere fact that he even entertained such a suggestion revealed to me the utterly inverted and profoundly misguided nature of his thinking regarding this entire convoluted situation. However, James relentlessly persisted, asserting that if I truly reposed my trust in him, then I ought to be willing to dedicate time to Victoria's company. He contended that my steadfast refusal to even countenance a meeting with her was merely providing further substantiation to his friend's assertions regarding my insecurity and domineering tendencies. He meticulously framed it as though the mature, self-assured course of action would be to sit down with his former partner and meticulously resolve any lingering issues like rational adults. I endeavored to elucidate to him that this entire matter was not fundamentally about trust or insecurity. It was, rather, fundamentally about the establishment of appropriate and healthy boundaries within the context of our committed relationship, but he continually reverted to emphasizing what his friends purportedly thought and how the situation appeared to external observers. He maintained that everyone within their shared social circle was utterly perplexed as to why I steadfastly refused to even attempt to cultivate an amicable relationship with Victoria, and that this recalcitrance was consequently engendering an atmosphere of tension for all involved parties. The entirety of this discussion irrevocably impressed upon me the profound realization that James accorded greater significance to the opinions of his friends than to my own emotional well-being. He was demonstrably more preoccupied with presenting himself as the individual whose fiancé arbitrarily forbade him from maintaining friendships with his ex than he was with the undeniable fact that his friends genuinely believed he ought to summarily discard me. On Thursday afternoon, I was at a prominent retail establishment, Target, procuring various supplies for my professional responsibilities, when I unexpectedly encountered Mila, one of James' professional colleagues from his workplace. We had met on a few prior occasions at informal company happy hours, and she had consistently exhibited an exceptionally friendly demeanor. She was situated within the pharmaceutical section, in the process of acquiring some allergy medication, and we ultimately found ourselves engaged in conversation while patiently awaiting our turn in the checkout queue. She made a passing reference to having heard about our impending nuptial ceremony and how undeniably exhilarating such a prospect must be. However, she then adopted a peculiar expression on her countenance and inquired if everything was, in fact, satisfactory. When I queried her as to the precise meaning of her question, she divulged that James had appeared remarkably stressed lately and that he had been confiding in some of the male colleagues at work concerning various relationship-related issues. My stomach immediately plummeted, as I comprehended with sickening clarity that James had been discussing our private problems at his workplace as well, not merely within the confines of his established friendship group. Mila stated that she harbored no desire to become embroiled in our personal affairs, but that she had inadvertently overheard James engaging in a conversation with Earl regarding whether it was considered normal for fiancés to exhibit jealousy towards their partner's female acquaintances. She elaborated that it appeared as though he was soliciting counsel on how to manage a situation with an individual who was demonstrating an unreasonable stance regarding the establishment of boundaries. I was utterly dumbfounded by the realization that he was portraying me as the problematic party to his professional colleagues as well. Mila, sensing my palpable distress, expressed that she probably ought not to have disclosed any information. But then she further mentioned that Earl had advised James that some women are simply incapable of tolerating their partner maintaining female friendships, and that perhaps James needed to adopt a more resolute stance in establishing clear expectations. So now I am discovering that not only have his collegiate friends been actively debating whether he should summarily abandon me, but his professional colleagues are also under the impression that I am some variety of excessively jealous girlfriend who is utterly incapable of tolerating his maintenance of female friendships. James has been systematically constructing this disparaging portrayal of me as an insecure, overly controlling individual to virtually every person in his life, and I had been entirely oblivious to this insidious campaign. Upon my return to our shared residence and my direct confrontation with James regarding his discussions about our relationship with his coworkers, he attempted to diminish the gravity of the situation by asserting that he was merely venting about the inherent stress of wedding planning and soliciting general advice. But I unequivocally pointed out that inquiring whether it is considered normal for fiancés to exhibit jealousy is demonstrably not synonymous with merely venting about the logistical complexities of wedding preparations. He was specifically framing me as the fundamental issue and actively seeking external validation that my behavior was unreasonable. James then retorted that I also discussed our relationship with my friends, so why should he be precluded from discussing it with his? But I patiently elucidated that there exists a crucial distinction between openly discussing problems with trusted, intimate friends and presenting a highly skewed, one-sided rendition of events to professional colleagues and mere acquaintances. When I engage in discussions with Carly or my close friends regarding relationship matters, I am actively seeking genuine counsel and diverse perspectives. James, on the other hand, is demonstrably seeking individuals who will readily concur with his assertion that I am being difficult. The argument further intensified when James leveled an accusation against me, asserting that I was being paranoid and suggesting that perhaps his friends and coworkers were discerning something about my own conduct that I was incapable of perceiving. He contended that when multiple individuals are conveying the same sentiment to you, perhaps you ought to seriously consider the possibility that they might, in fact, possess a valid point, instead of presuming that everyone else is mistaken. I was utterly incredulous that he was actually proposing that I should internalize relationship advice from individuals like Earl and Tommy, the latter of whom still behaves as though he is an active member of a collegiate fraternity. But James persistently insisted that an external perspective is inherently valuable and that I was far too intimately involved in the situation to perceive it with objective clarity. He even suggested that perhaps I ought to consider that my established boundaries were not as inherently reasonable as I perceived them to be. On Friday morning, I had to depart our residence early for an impending professional presentation. And as I was retrieving my keys from the kitchen countertop, I observed James' mobile device plugged in and illuminated with a notification for a received text message. I harbored no intention of surreptitiously prying, but the preview clearly displayed Victoria's name and something related to wedding planning. Without even consciously deliberating, I impulsively picked up his phone to ascertain the content of her message. The message inquired whether James had engaged in a conversation with me regarding a reconsideration of the guest list and whether there was any remote possibility that I might change my stance regarding her inclusion. But when I scrolled upwards to view the entirety of their preceding conversation, I uncovered weeks of messages exchanged between them, the existence of which I had been completely unaware. Victoria had been consistently dispatching text messages to James concerning a diverse array of subjects: workplace drama, family-related issues, random musings about their shared collegiate past. However, interspersed within all the casual discourse were messages directly pertaining to our relationship and our upcoming wedding. She persistently inquired about the progression of the wedding planning and whether I was proving to be difficult regarding any aspect. James would respond by vocalizing complaints about the significant stress I was purportedly inflicting upon him with all my firmly held opinions and exacting expectations. In one particular exchange from several weeks prior, Victoria was commiserating with James about the presumed arduousness of meticulously planning a wedding with an individual who possessed such unyielding opinions about every single detail. James responded by expressing that he sometimes wondered if he and Victoria would have enjoyed a more effortless relationship, given her consistently laid-back disposition regarding various matters. Victoria replied with an abundance of crying laughing emojis and remarked that some individuals are simply inherently more high-maintenance than others. They were literally engaged in a conversation about me as though I were some form of cumbersome burden that James was compelled to tolerate. And Victoria was actively encouraging this narrative, deliberately positioning herself as the effortlessly cool, easygoing individual who would never instigate problems as I apparently do. But the most egregious aspect was discovering messages where James was divulging highly specific details concerning our private disagreements to Victoria. He informed her about the particular instance where I became upset because she consistently liked all of his Instagram posts, and Victoria responded by claiming she had not even consciously realized she was engaging in that behavior and that she would exercise greater caution in the future. James, in turn, instructed her that she had no need to alter anything, asserting that I was simply being overly sensitive. There were messages discussing our contentious arguments over the guest list, our disagreements regarding the allocated wedding budget. James was actively sharing intimate and private details concerning our relationship with his former romantic partner, and she was responding with unsolicited advice and commentary, as though she were some kind of self-proclaimed relationship expert. When James returned home from work on Friday evening, I did not even afford him the opportunity to formulate any excuses. I simply commenced reading the incriminating messages aloud, meticulously observing the dramatic alteration in his facial expression as he gradually comprehended the profound depth of his predicament. He attempted to offer an explanation by asserting that he and Victoria had always possessed the capacity to discuss any subject imaginable, and that he valued her perspective because she understood him so intimately. He claimed he harbored no intention of betraying my trust. He was merely attempting to process his own feelings with an individual who purportedly understood him. But I unequivocally highlighted that engaging in the process of working through your feelings about your current committed relationship with your former girlfriend is neither normal nor appropriate when you are formally engaged to someone else. James became visibly frustrated and asserted that I was distorting the reality of the situation, magnifying it into something it was not, that Victoria was merely acting as a supportive friend and assisting him in navigating a period of considerable stress. But I read aloud to him the specific message where she unequivocally stated that some people are naturally more high maintenance, and then directly inquired how that particular statement constituted supportive behavior towards our relationship. He was utterly incapable of furnishing a response to that question. Consequently, he instead became irate with me for having accessed his phone and thereby infringing upon his privacy. He contended that if I genuinely trusted him, I would not feel the compulsion to inspect his messages and that my snooping was merely providing further substantiation to his friend's assertions regarding my controlling and insecure tendencies. I unequivocally informed him that discovering my fiancé has been systematically sharing intimate details concerning our relationship with his former girlfriend is not fundamentally about trust or insecurity. It is, rather, fundamentally about basic respect and the establishment of appropriate boundaries. But James persistently attempted to reverse the blame onto me, asserting that healthy relationships necessitate trust, and that I was actively seeking out problems where none genuinely existed. My sister, Carly, contacted me on Thursday evening, ostensibly to simply check in about various wedding-related matters, and I ultimately ended up divulging the entirety of the situation to her. She became absolutely furious, an emotion I had rarely witnessed in her, and immediately declared that she had harbored apprehensions regarding James' friendship group from the very outset, due to their collective tendency to still behave as though they were in their collegiate years. She cogently pointed out that it is highly peculiar for a group of men in their late 20s to be so intensely invested in each other's romantic relationships, and that genuinely healthy friendship groups do not engage in ballots to determine whether someone should terminate their partnership. Carly also articulated a profound observation that resonated deeply and enduringly within me. She inquired why James required the explicit approval of his friends to marry me if he genuinely loved me and desired to dedicate his life to me. Why, she questioned, did the opinions of Tommy or anyone else genuinely matter? The undeniable fact that he is so profoundly preoccupied with their collective opinion strongly suggests that perhaps he is not as unequivocally certain about the stability and longevity of our relationship as he purports to be. But when I subsequently informed her about the clandestine messages exchanged with Victoria, Carly completely lost her composure. She vehemently declared that James was essentially engaged in an emotional affair and was utilizing Victoria as a receptive sounding board for all his relationship challenges, instead of diligently working through them with me. She pointed out that seeking counsel from your former romantic partner regarding your current committed relationship is, by very definition, undeniably inappropriate, and that Victoria was demonstrably encouraging the ongoing drama because she relished being positioned as the empathetic and understanding individual. Carly firmly stated that I needed to seriously deliberate whether I genuinely desired to marry an individual who openly discusses our private affairs with his former girlfriend, and who permits his friends to conduct a vote on whether I am sufficiently commendable for him. She underscored that this specific pattern of behavior does not ameliorate post-marriage. Indeed, she warned, it invariably exacerbates, because then he will perceive that he possesses an even greater sense of ownership over the dynamics of the relationship. On Saturday morning, James made an attempt to alleviate the palpable tension by proposing that we embark on a day excursion to the outlet shopping center situated approximately an hour's drive away, with the purported aim of seeking out some last-minute wedding accoutrements. I surmised that he was hoping that by dedicating time together outside the confines of our apartment, it would facilitate a return to a state of normalcy, but I remained utterly incandescent with rage regarding every single revelation I had recently uncovered. While we were perambulating through the various corridors of the retail complex, James persistently attempted to introduce trivial wedding details as though absolutely nothing untoward had transpired. He expressed a desire to discuss whether we ought to consider an upgrade to the floral arrangements and whether we had yet received a sufficient number of RSVP confirmations. But my thoughts were ceaselessly consumed by the recollection of how he had been vocalizing complaints to Victoria about my firmly held opinions and exacting expectations, and how his friends demonstrably believed he ought to summarily discard me. When we paused for our midday meal at the designated food court, James finally addressed the conspicuous unspoken issue by suggesting that perhaps we ought to collectively engage in a conversation with his friends, so that I could personally ascertain that they did not, in fact, harbor any genuine dislike for me. He proposed hosting an informal dinner gathering at our residence so that I could endeavor to demonstrate to them that I was not the domineering individual they apparently presumed me to be. I unequivocally informed him that I harbored no interest whatsoever in auditioning for the approval of his friends, and that the mere fact that he entertained the notion that I should be compelled to prove myself to them unequivocally demonstrated the utterly inverted and profoundly misguided nature of his core priorities. But James relentlessly insisted that such a gathering would facilitate a complete clearing of the air, and that once they had the opportunity to become more intimately acquainted with me, they would ultimately realize that their preceding apprehensions were entirely unfounded. The conversation rapidly escalated in intensity, becoming exceedingly heated, right there in the very midst of the bustling food court, with James asserting that I was being stubbornly recalcitrant and me, in turn, highlighting the egregious impropriety of having to campaign for my own fiancé's companions to deem me worthy of him. A pair of adolescents seated at an adjacent table were quite clearly eavesdropping on our animated dispute, and I felt utterly mortified that we were engaging in such a deeply personal and contentious discussion in a public venue. But James appeared utterly unconcerned by the spectacle we were creating. He persistently pressed his point regarding the profound importance he ascribed to the opinions of his friends, and how he required them to feel at ease with our burgeoning relationship. He contended that if I genuinely loved him, I would exert a concerted effort to cultivate relationships with the individuals who held significant importance for him, even if such endeavors proved to be personally uncomfortable for me. I am scheduled to meet with my mother this forthcoming weekend to discuss the final intricate details for the bridal shower, but now I am utterly at a loss as to what I am even capable of communicating to her. How does one adequately explain that your fiancé's friends genuinely believe he ought to summarily discard you, and that he is not entirely in disagreement with their sentiments? How does one admit that your fiancé has been systematically discussing your private relationship specificities with his former girlfriend and actively soliciting counsel from his professional colleagues on how to manage your purportedly unreasonable behavior? The wedding is now a mere 5 weeks away, and I am consumed by the profound sensation that I no longer even truly comprehend the individual I am slated to marry. The man with whom I initially fell deeply in love would never have permitted his companions to conduct a ballot on the viability of our relationship or shared intimate details concerning our private disagreements with his former partner. But apparently that particular man never genuinely existed, or James has undergone such a profound transformation as to become an entirely different individual. I find myself perpetually oscillating between sensations of deep emotional hurt and absolute, unadulterated fury. A segment of my being yearns to unilaterally rescind the wedding arrangements myself, solely to witness how his cherished friends react when their unsolicited vote no longer holds any sway. But the more substantial portion of my introspection is beginning to seriously ponder whether perhaps they are, in fact, correct. Perhaps James and I are not as fundamentally compatible as I had initially presumed us to be. Second update. Well, events have dramatically escalated in ways I could never have possibly foreseen. And I am, quite honestly, questioning every single facet of this individual whom I confidently believed I knew intimately. Firstly, I extend my profound gratitude to every single person who unequivocally advised me that I needed to resolutely maintain my stance. The comments that specifically highlighted how James was essentially engaged in an emotional affair with Victoria truly served as an epiphany, opening my eyes to the gravity and profound seriousness of this entire predicament. And to the perceptive individual who remarked that his friends sounded akin to a toxic boy club, you were, without any doubt, absolutely correct. Consequently, on Sunday I was scheduled to convene with my mother at a quaint cafe situated in the vicinity of her residence to meticulously review the specific details for the bridal shower. My mother has been profoundly excited about this impending matrimonial ceremony and has dedicated several months to the meticulous planning of the shower. She possessed an exhaustive list encompassing various games and decorative elements and was vocalizing her immense pride in my presumed fortune of having discovered such an exceptional gentleman. I persistently endeavored to concentrate on her discourse concerning the menu selections and the guest list, but my thoughts were entirely consumed by the recollection of James informing Victoria that I am high maintenance, and the undeniable fact that his friends had conducted a ballot on whether he ought to summarily abandon me. Ultimately, my mother ceased her monologue and directly inquired as to the nature of my distress, discerning that I was demonstrably not actively listening. I attempted to dismiss her concerns by vaguely asserting that I was merely experiencing an elevated level of stress due to the intricacies of wedding planning. But my mother possesses an intimate understanding of my character, knowing me far too well. She persistently pressed the issue until I ultimately broke down emotionally and divulged the entirety of the distressing narrative. The bachelor party vote, James' egregious act of sharing our private affairs with Victoria, the incriminating messages I had uncovered, every single detail was laid bare. My mother became absolutely incandescent with rage, a level of fury I had never once witnessed in her throughout my entire life. She commenced an impassioned tirade, articulating how James had profoundly disrespected not merely me, but our entire family, by permitting his companions to engage in such a demeaning discussion about our intimate relationship. She emphatically declared that a genuinely honorable man does not permit his male associates to disparage his fiancée, and he most certainly does not resort to confiding his relationship challenges to his former romantic partner. Then my mother articulated a sentiment that resonated with particularly profound impact within me. She inquired if I had at any point informed my father about any of these troubling developments. And when I responded in the negative, she unequivocally stated that I needed to apprise him immediately. She contended that my father would be utterly devastated to comprehend that James had been permitting individuals to disrespect his daughter in such a flagrant manner, and that he deserved to be fully cognizant of the true character of the man he was on the verge of welcoming into our familial unit. The mere contemplation of having to relay this distressing information to my father impressed upon me the profound and utterly humiliating nature of this entire situation. My parents have been so incredibly supportive of James and so immensely enthusiastic about the impending wedding. They have been proudly extolling the virtues of their future son-in-law to their various acquaintances and vocalizing their immense joy that I had discovered someone who treated me with kindness and consideration. How am I possibly expected to inform them that he has, in reality, been permitting his companions to debate whether I am, in fact, worthy of him? My mother abruptly cancelled the remainder of our bridal shower planning session and declared that we needed to engage in a serious and comprehensive family discussion. She telephoned my father and requested that he come to meet us at the house, as we needed to address a matter of significant importance. Throughout the entire journey to their residence, I was consumed by an overwhelming sense of dread at the prospect of having to elucidate this convoluted mess to him. When we arrived at my parents' house, my father was patiently awaiting us in the living room, an expression of profound concern etched upon his countenance. My mother seated herself beside him and instructed me to recount the entirety of the narrative from its very genesis. Consequently, I was compelled to reiterate the entire distressing saga once more. The vote, the Victoria messages, every single detail. My father adopted a chilling silence, the kind of silence he exhibits when he is genuinely and profoundly incensed. He did not interject with interruptions or pose any questions. He simply remained seated, listening intently, his jaw becoming progressively more clenched and rigid. When I concluded my narration, he maintained his silence for a protracted period before he finally spoke. He articulated that in 35 years of matrimonial partnership, he has never once permitted his friends to criticize my mother. And he has never, under any circumstances, shared private specificities concerning their relationship with other women. He declared that diligently safeguarding your partner from disrespect is one of the most fundamental responsibilities inherent in maintaining a committed relationship, and that James has demonstrably failed at fulfilling that sacred duty in every conceivable manner. Then my father inquired if James had ever issued an apology for any of these transgressions, or if he was contemplating severing all contact with Victoria and establishing clear boundaries with his friends. When I reluctantly admitted that James still harbored the belief that I was overreacting and that he desired me to meet with Victoria to supposedly prove that I was not controlling, my father's expression suggested he was on the verge of physically assaulting something. My mother proposed that perhaps they ought to engage in a direct conversation with James, and I immediately panicked, as I could vividly envision how catastrophically such an encounter would unfold. James would, in all likelihood, adopt a highly defensive posture and endeavor to portray me as being overly dramatic, and then my parents would consequently harbor an even more diminished opinion of him. But my father firmly stated that if James was to become an integral member of this family, he needed to comprehend that disrespecting me was tantamount to disrespecting all of us. On Monday morning, I was compelled to return to my professional duties, and I was, quite honestly, profoundly grateful for the welcome distraction it provided. My coworker, Natalie, observed that I appeared somewhat discomfited and inquired if everything was proceeding smoothly with the wedding planning. I harbored no desire to delve into the exhaustive narrative at my place of employment, but I ultimately ended up confiding in her about the troubling situation that had transpired at the bachelor party. Natalie was genuinely shocked and expressed that her husband's companions would never even conceive of engaging in such an egregious act. She firmly stated that when one is involved in a committed relationship, your partner ought to be valiantly defending you to their friends, not passively permitting them to conduct a ballot on your suitability.